Okay, this is March 19th, and this is Mr. Murray bringing Lunar and Venus, their March 19th English language arts lesson. So today your lesson is going to, hey, Carmelo, welcome back. Today we're going to go over Anne Frank Act 4. We're also going to go over conflicts. We're going to review dramatic irony, and we are going to review characterization. So Carmelo, if you haven't already, I would like you to go into Google Classrooms. To do that, you just type in Google Classrooms on a Google search, and then you type in this number, in which I'm putting in chat right now, in the class code, and then you will be able to see all the assignments. Now, you can do this instead of doing the packet. So you can do the packet also, and I'll give you credit, or you can do the packet instead of the classwork. But if you do the classwork, there you go. Hey, welcome back, Miss Yingling. So I assume like other students will watch this who aren't here live, so I'll just do the whole spiel, and anyone watching this later can just watch it later. So we're going to start with conflict types. So on Google Classroom, and I already put the code in the chat, there's a video that goes over the different conflict types. Now, Anne Frank's really good, and it's pretty unique in the fact that it actually covers all of the conflict types, the four major ones at least. So there are four major types of conflicts: man versus man, man versus self, man versus nature, and man versus society. You have internal conflicts, which would be something taking place inside of a person. Excuse me. So that would be like your man versus self. So a good example would be if a basketball player, since we have Carmelo here, if you knew you had to go guard someone who's a lot bigger, a lot faster, and a lot stronger than you, on the inside, you might be dealing with like pressure, maybe like fear, maybe self-doubt, not knowing if you can do it or not. That would be an example of man versus self. Now, when you were actually playing, that's an external conflict because you are going against another person. So when you're fighting against the other person or playing against the other person, that's an example of man versus man. Now, that would work even if one of the or both of the participants were women. So if it was Miss Yingling versus Miss Holden in a game of checkers or chess or soccer or whatever, it would still be qualified as man versus man, even though the participants are women. The other two major ones are man versus society, and that's a big one that you can see right now in the world around us. When someone's going against society or disagrees with an aspect of society, that would be man versus society. So a good example in our story would be the Franks are being hunted by the Green Police. They're being hunted by the Nazis. So they're going against the people in charge. So that's an example of man versus society. And then the last important one is man versus nature. And man versus nature is when you are going against either an animal, a natural disaster, or disease. So right now, what we're facing is man versus nature because we are being, in a conflict with a disease. Welcome, Kyrie. The class code for 8th grade I didn't type in yet. I will type it in right now. It is ZCDPHXL. And for both the 7th and the 8th grade Google Classroom, there is all the content that you would need, the PDFs of the story. 7th grade and 8th grade both have audiobook versions. And 7th grade also gets a play. There's a link to a play, so you can just watch the play. So welcome, Tristan. Welcome, Kyrie. Good to see you. So this is mainly going to be for 7th grade, Kyrie. I made an earlier video that was kind of like 7th and 8th, but you're welcome to stick around because there is some overlap between To Kill a Mockingbird and Anne Frank. So moving on from the conflict types, Act 1, Scene 4 of Anne Frank. I'm going to do a quick summary of that. If you haven't read it yet, that's okay. Again, it's on the Google Classrooms. You can also listen to it on the Google Classrooms or watch it. But Act 4 is important. Plays follow the parts of plot diagram. that we went over in class. Both grades did that. Remember, it looks like a little V. Excuse my art, because that's generally Miss Miller's job. So you start in your exposition where you meet our characters. So in Anne Frank, we meet Mr. Frank. If you remember, way back when he was crushed, the war is over. He knows everyone died in his family except himself. He knows Mr. Crawler is dead. The only person who he really knows who's still alive is Meep, and Meep's much younger than he is. She had helped him through the course of the play to get supplies and such. So he doesn't really have anyone left, and he's really depressed. He lost all everything that's important to him. And then he finds the scarf, he finds the diary, and he starts remembering. So we're getting the story through his memories that are being jogged by the diary that his daughter kept. So that's our exposition, and that's why it's scene 1 in Act 1. And then we have our rising action when we're going up, and that's when we find out what our problem is. So if any of you want to type in what you think the problem is, what do you think the main problem is in Anne Frank? And it's probably not going to be what you expect. Okay, so the main problem in the first act, even though they're being hunted by the Nazis, most of their conflict is going to be internal, right? Because they're trying to deal with, yeah, like basketball, they're trying to deal with their own emotions being cramped in this tiny annex with all these other people. Yeah, the fact that they're hiding. Good job, Madison, and welcome back. The fact that they're trapped here with all these people, that's their struggle. So they have an internal struggle because they have to deal with their own emotions, regulating how being trapped with all these other people makes them feel. And then it's also a man versus man situation because they have conflicts with each other. Like Mrs. Frank has a conflict with Anne because they're growing farther and farther apart. Mr. Frank is trying to keep everyone together. The Van Dams are becoming kind of selfish. Dussel is kind of a jerk. So you have like all these other struggles. Plus Anne and Peter have like a little beginnings of a relationship. So even though that's more like a positive conflict, there's also that conflict there, whether or not they can get close to each other and develop a relationship in such a confined location. Yeah, so Act 2 was again mainly, or not Act 2, Scene 2 is mainly us seeing that problem come to a head. Now Act 3, the one that we just read in class about a week ago, last time we had class, what was the climax? So what was like the big turning point in Act 3? Like what was the big problem they faced in Act 3? You guys remember? Just going to kind of dance here while I wait for you. Okay, so I'm assuming you're just answering your heads. So, and for people who are watching this later, Act 3, yeah, I should probably give you a quick summary before I make you answer that. So Act 3 is where they've been living together for months now. The Van Dams are kind of bickering back and forth. And Mr. Crawler comes and asks them if they will take Mr. Dussel into their hiding place, even though they don't really have space for him or food, and Crawler promises it won't be for very long. Kind of gave you the answer. Yeah, so yeah. So the fact that Dussel they're being asked to take in Dussel. So like one of their main conflicts is the lack of stuff, right? Lack of space, lack of food. And they're being asked to take on this additional problem, this idea that they're going to have another mouth to feed. So that's the big conflict in Scene 3. And Mr. Frank, of course, says like they're take this extra person. So that once he agrees to take Mr. Dussel in, now you're coming down from the climax of the first act. And we move into Scene 4. Yeah, exactly. So like that's kind of like the the conflict what Madison just typed there. And then the tipping point, the climax, is when they agree to take in another mouth, even though the Mr. Crawler says it won't be for very long. Everyone there kind of assumes it will be for a long time because they're running out of hiding places. Yeah, I recognized your last name, Tristan, so I figured that was you. Yeah, so Act 4 is the one that you guys are going to have to read or listen to on your own or watch. So when you go into Google Classrooms, you're going to watch, listen to, or read it. And Act 4 is really short, so it won't take you a long time to watch, listen to, or read it. The entire act, the entire scene rather, basically just deals with Anne waking up because of night terrors. So she's having these nightmares. We learn that there have been air raids in the background, on and off, where the Allies are bombing the Nazis. So the Allies are trying not to bomb like residential centers. So they're trying not to kill like civilians, but they're trying to blow up like arms manufacturers and things like that, and just military targets. But they can hear this, and it's shaking the buildings. So Anne's having a nightmare because of this. So she hears these bombings throughout the day and at night, and then again during the day is when they sleep. So she wakes up screaming a lot of times, and this causes a lot of anxiety because if anyone hears them, they're going to get in trouble because someone could turn them into the Green Police, to the Nazis for a reward, or maybe just out of spite because there is a lot of that anti-Semitism going on. So the play begins. Yeah, she might give their spot away, exactly. Hi, Elena. Welcome. We've been talking a little bit already. We're just starting to summarize Act 4. So anyways, Act 4 begins. We find out that Mr. Van Damme has been stealing food. No one else knows yet. And he was the person who was complaining the most about the lack of food. So he's been stealing food. No one else knows yet. They're going to find out later on. But as he's stealing food, Anne wakes up screaming, and we find out she's having night terrors, and we find out these night terrors have been happening for some time. So everyone gets up, tries to see what the problem is. Everyone kind of either tries to console her or get everything to quiet back down. Mrs. Frank tries to console her first, but Anne pushes Mrs. Frank away. Because again, like we said, Anne and Mrs. Frank have been growing apart. Anne's 13 at this time, maybe 14. I think they've been in here for like 6-7 months by this point. In the end, they're there for like 2 years, so I'm not sure exactly how old she is at this point, but they're growing apart. And like as young people, like because they're roughly the same age as you guys are, a lot of times like parents and children have issues in the teenage years, and she's having this issue. So she would rather deal with her father, who seems to be more calm, than the mother, who's also kind of high strung. So in that we learn of like a man versus self struggle between Mrs. Frank, right? Because she's upset with herself for not being able to interact better with her daughter. So she's kind of internalizing that, and we find out she's starting to think she might be some sort of a failure, and she consoles, she gets some consolation from Margot, her other daughter. Low key, high key kind of thing. Oh, thanks. Thanks for that. So anyways, that's our man versus self in this act. And then we also get some man versus man because Dussel, even though he has said previously that he was very good with children and parents tended to bring young people to be his patients because he's so good with kids, he really doesn't like Anne. Mr. Van Damme makes a comment saying, I thought she was being killed because of the screams. And Mr. Dussel's response is, well, I wish, right? So we get the idea that he has some real dislike towards Anne. And granted, he's just been woken up, but she's still like a kid, he's still an adult, and he still has this like venom towards her. So that's our man versus man conflict here. Anyways, Anne eventually gets consoled by her father. He asks if she wants him to read to her, but she really just wants someone to sit and talk to for a little bit. So they just kind of sit together, and he assures her that everything will be all right. He also tries to convince everyone living in the annex that the air raids are a good thing because that shows that the Allies are pushing the Nazis back, and maybe they'll be saved soon. So everyone's afraid that they might die in an explosion, but Mr. Frank's trying to convince them that no, this is a good thing because the Allies are coming, the Americans, the British, the French, which ones haven't given up yet, might come and save them. So like he's trying to use this bad moment as like some hope, right? So earlier, before we started the chapter, we talked about dramatic irony. The biggest dramatic irony, of course, is that we know everyone's going to die except Mr. Frank. But then we also get some more in this act when we find out that Mr. Van Damme's been stealing, because the rest of the people don't know that yet, but we do. And that also gives us some clues as to his character, because he's been complaining that there isn't enough food to go around, but he's been stealing a lot of it for himself, right? So like we find out he's pretty selfish, he's kind of greedy. We already kind of knew that. So we're getting a lot of negatives about him. and we're not getting a lot of positives, kind of like the flip of Mr. Frank. We're not getting any negative things about Mr. Frank, but we're getting a lot of positives about Mr. Frank. Was wondering if any of you guys were able to catch any negative aspects about Mr. Frank. He spends so much of his time trying to keep everything running smoothly and calming any problems. Have any of you guys noticed any like weak spots in Mr. Frank? Is there any person or character in the play that he kind of neglects that you guys have caught up on? Because that's one of the criticisms people have of Mr. Frank. He spends all this time like making sure everyone else is okay, but he really does neglect one character, or at least he seems to neglect one character. I didn't get a haircut, but my waves are coming in, so maybe that's what you've noticed. And then back to my question, a lot of people say that he's kind of neglectful towards his wife. So he knows that his wife is having a lot of internal struggles because she doesn't get along well with Anne, and she's very upset about it. And it's pretty obvious that the mother's upset about her relationship with her daughter being so strained. So some people have pointed out who've read this play before that he neglects his wife. Like he knows this is a problem and he doesn't try to fix it. And maybe like he enjoys being, the center of attention, from getting all this attention from his daughter, because that's kind of his only positive reinforcement throughout this entire ordeal. Because he doesn't really get along with Van Dams, he doesn't seem like he interacts with Dussel very much. So that's kind of like his social interaction is with his daughter, and his daughter looks up to him, so he gets some sort of motivation or reinforcement from that. And he doesn't share with his wife, and he doesn't go out of his way to mend that relationship. But yeah. Anyways, so that act ends pretty quickly because, again, we said it's a short act, with Mr. Frank trying to convince everybody that the air raids aren't a big deal because it's showing that the Allies will come. Another thing I wanted to bring up before we wrap up was just the difference between dramatic irony and irony. You guys are pretty aware that dramatic irony is when you know something's going to happen, but the characters don't. Regular irony, we went over very briefly in the beginning of the year. And irony is just when the opposite of what we think will happen happens. So in the play, Dussel suggests that he's very good with children, right? So when he introduces himself to Anne, he says, "Don't worry about it. We're going to get along fine because I'm really good with children," right? So in Act 4, though, we find out that Mr. Dussel and Anne do not interact well at all together, right? So that's an example of irony because he says one thing, but something else happens. So that's irony. Whereas dramatic irony, again, is when we know something's going to happen, but... Well, I'm not spoiling anything. I'm just giving you Act 4. So I'm not going to tell you guys the end of the play. You guys already know the end of the play, just because they tell you in the very beginning. Okay, so quickly to recap, we're in the falling action, since Scene 4 is the falling action. We went over the different character conflict types: internal, external, man versus man nature, and man versus self, and man versus society. No, I can't talk. I put a video on Google Classrooms, kind of like one of those funny YouTube ones that I show you guys before class sometimes. It goes over all of those as well. On Google Classrooms, there's a quick quiz that goes over the different conflict types. There's also a quiz over all of Scene 4. So you're going to want to either read that, listen to that, or watch that before you take the quiz. Okay, and yeah, so if you guys have any questions, that would be a great time to ask them. I can't get there. Okay, so to get to Google Classrooms, all you have to do is type on Google search and just type in Google Classrooms. So pretty simple. I'll do that as I'm talking. So once you click on that, it should pop right up. It will ask you what the class code is. So I put that in already near the top. If you scroll up to the top of the chat, it should show up. Unless there have been so many chats, it's disappeared. I'll type it in again. Give me 1 sec. It's JTXJLCD for 7th grade and ZCDTHXL for 8th grade. So go ahead and try that now, so I know if there's an issue or not. You can also post questions on that, so if you can't get a hold of me when we do the live stream, okay, bye, Madison. You can do that as well. Now, I don't want to review Scene 5 until next week. So next week, I think I come back on Tuesday. I'm pretty sure my days are Tuesday and Thursday. So Tuesday, the YouTube will be kind of a summary over Scene 5, and then we'll kind of review the entire first act. So by that time, if you wouldn't mind, I'd appreciate you guys either watching, listening to, or reading the play. I know it's not as much fun to read it by yourself, like a book. Plays are really meant to be acted out. But are you feeling okay? Yes, I am feeling okay. I'm pretty sure I'm not a zombie yet. Miss Miller might be a zombie, but I'm fine. Hopefully you guys are all feeling fine too. And then some of you guys showed up late. So we, in the beginning, we talked about whether or not, so in the beginning, we talked about whether or not you should have the packets or the Google Classroom. So that's kind of up to you guys. So you can do the packet, and that's fine, or you can do the Google Classroom. The Google Classroom is an extension of what we've been doing in class, and the packet's kind of like supplemental materials, and it covers all the bases still, but it's not a continuation of the stories that we've been reading. So it's kind of either or. I personally would prefer you do the Google Classrooms. But if you do the packets instead, or if you do both, you can always get extra credit. We won't be able to do the projects just because I don't know how we would accomplish that. I'll probably try to work in some projects maybe next week that we can do all online, like maybe have you guys read out some of the scenes, and then you can present that somehow over YouTube. But I'm still kind of learning the whole YouTube thing. Oh, okay. I see you look old today. Thank you. I think that's just the lighting. As you know, I am still fairly young, so it's probably not that. Okay, so before I let you guys leave, while you're all here, normally when class begins, I give you a question. So the question, and Madison already answered this because she was on earlier, and Carmelo already answered it, but for everybody else, one of the big themes of this story is, are people basically good? So they're stuck in this bad situation. A lot of pettiness comes out. A lot of negative qualities are on display. But despite all that, the playwright, the person who wrote this play, is trying to convince you that people are basically good. So what do you think? Do you think that people are essentially good? Or do you think the bad situation just shows who they are? Type an answer into the live chat, and then I'll tell you what the playwright thinks after I have a sip from my fancy R2 cup. That actually, I think Miss Yingling gave me this once upon a time. So shout out to Miss Yingling. Okay, don't leave. You didn't write your answer yet. Okay, so whatever. All right, so the playwright, what the playwright's trying to suggest, right, is that even though being in all these bad situations brings out the worst in people, even though you only really see the negative side of the Van Dams, you see the negative side of Dussel, you see even some negative stuff from Anne and from her mother, basically, though, everybody at heart is a decent person. So you see this most clearly through Anne, because Anne's behavior goes up and down. She's cruel to her mother sometimes. She plays games on the Van Dams, nothing really like mean, but her behavior like kind of goes up and down, right? So even though she's in this bad situation, though, her father's trying to convince her constantly to do the right thing, and that people are basically decent. Even though they're being hunted by the Green Police, even though they're hiding from the Nazis, his central message is people are basically good, right, at heart. And you can see this in some of the characters. You have Meat, you have Dirk, who never actually shows up, but you hear about him, and Mr. Crawler. All three of those characters would be in zero danger if they just kind of washed their hands of the Franks. Any one of them could turn them in, get a reward. Mr. Crawler really doesn't owe. He owns the factory now because Mr. Frank gave it to him, so he kind of owes him that sense. But legally, he doesn't owe him anything. He could turn him in, and he would still own the factory, and he could get extra money, and he'd be fine. But he's still like risking himself personally for this group of people, right? And he doesn't even know the Van Dams. I think Dirk knows Dussel because that was his dentist, but Mr. Crawler has no real association with him. So you have like this these three characters who are placing themselves in danger, right? So they're kind of like the people acting bravely, the people acting heroically, the people demonstrating Mr. Frank's point that everyone's basically decent at heart, even though some of the people in the annex are acting kind of petty towards each other. But all right, so we're about 3 minutes left, so I'm just going to close off 3 minutes early because that was quicker than I expected. I appreciate that I'm less annoying over the phone, so thank you. So I'll see you guys on Tuesday, and then we will do a quick summary of scene 5 and a wrap up over the entire 5th scene. So, all right, thanks, and I'll talk to you all later. Oh, hey, Cameron. Good to see you. We're just wrapping this up, so I think you can watch it still. You just go back to YouTube and you can like fast forward through any of the boring parts. But the main thing that you missed, Cameron, is the Google Classrooms. So I'll type in your class code again before I leave, right there. And if you just go into Google, type in Google Classrooms in the search, it'll pop up. And there you go. All right. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will talk to you later. Oh, before I leave, since you just came on, Cameron, why don't you go ahead and try to get onto Google Classrooms, and then I can walk you through it if you need help. So, what you just need to do is type in on a Google search, Google Classrooms, and then you add class. So there's a little plus sign to the right of the screen. If you click it, join class will come up. Click that, and then you just type in that class code. All the stuff from class is on there. It's kind of like a continuation. So the play is in there in PDF form under materials. There's also a YouTube clip where the entire play is acted out by, I think, a high school. And then there's another series of clips which have the audiobook. So people are reading it to you. So it won't be quite the experience of in class of being able to act it out, especially with you, Cameron, doing an amazing Mr. Van Dam performance. But the second best thing. And then there are quizzes over all the important aspects of the conflicts, the different scenes, and all of Act 1 also. I'll add the stuff for Act 2 over the weekend. The code is JPXJLCD. There you go. And I'll go to the classroom too. That way I can see when you get in there. Make sure that you're in. Are you in? I'm logged into Venus and Lunar right now. You guys are doing the same thing. So when you get on there, the main page, there's kind of just like this list going down. There's something with Miss Miller reading from the packet. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, it will mention that I posted the text, audio, and visual versions. So you can just click on whichever you want. So you can click on the PDF, and that's the if you want to read it. Both acts of the play are on there if you want to watch it, and all of the acts are on YouTube if you just want to listen to it. That's just someone reading it. It's not me reading it. It's just some random person. Oh, did I give you the wrong code? Hang on, I'll type in the other code too. So I must have given you the code for 8th grade. So my bad. Try that code instead. If you want, you can always do the fireball work too. Uh, although I only put on the chapter 11 through for the book they're reading, so you might be a little bit lost on the story that they're reading. Yeah, and then if you just go down the list, there should be a bunch of stuff on there. The different quizzes. There's a question of the day in there. Basically, what we talked about. People are basically good, whether or not you agree with that. There's a conflict type video and activity on there. That was something we talked about before. And to see the video for the conflict types, you have to go to the instructions, but then it will pop up. And it'll just go over man versus nature, and all that. Okay, so I'm taking off. It's good seeing you. If you have any questions, either email me, ask it directly in Google Classrooms, and I'll be back on here Tuesday from 10:30 to 11 and from 11:30 to 12. So stay safe, kiddos, and I'll talk to you later.